All right, everyone, let's get started. Welcome. Thanks to everyone for joining us today. My name is Natasha Locken and I am Head of Communications at Global Action Plan. And it's my great pleasure to be chairing this panel discussion today alongside global eco-efficiency NGO CLASP, and we'll be hearing from them a little bit later. First, a little bit about Global Action Plan. So we are an environmental charity and we mobilise action on the systems that harm us and our planet, and our work is focused really centered on the intersection between human and planetary health, and one of the key areas of our work is air pollution, and this event is actually the third in a series on the topic of indoor air pollution, and at Global Action Plan we're working on the two big sources of that, domestic burning, particularly of wood, and gas cooking. We are doing a lot of work on domestic burning, and we're looking forward to the first ever Clean Air Night that's happening on the 24th of January 2024. So do get in touch if you want to find out more about that. But we are here today to talk about gas cooking. And Global Action Plan has been working with CLASP over the last year, supporting the launch of their series of reports on gas cooking. And the latest one was actually launched yesterday on World Ventilate Day, very appropriately. And that was on the results of their extensive in-home monitoring studies. And so previous webinars in this series have looked at indoor air quality more generally, and also the health and social costs of gas cooking. And if you, great if you came to those and you come along for the third, and if you haven't, then you can catch up with those on Global Action Plan's YouTube channel. But this morning's event is going to dive into the results of the in-home monitoring studies and consumer research reports. And we also want to open a discussion on the path forward. So this event is going to work in three acts. Firstly, Nicole Kearney from CLASP is going to take us through the key findings of the research. We are then going to open to our panel, Agnes Aguipong and Larissa Lockwood, to discuss this new research and why it's important. And then in the final act, we will think through solutions. We want this webinar to be as useful as possible for everyone attending. So please do use the Q&A function to ask questions of the panel, and you can pop those in at any time and we'll come to them later on in the discussion. So please send your questions in. The panel are engaged and ready to respond. Just a couple of other bits of housekeeping. Closed captions are available. So if you'd like to see them, you can enable the closed caption button at the bottom of your screen. And the event is being recorded, and we will make the recording and the presentations available to everyone afterwards. So without further ado, let's get into it. My first job is to introduce Nicole Kearney, who is the Director of CLASP Europe. And Nicole has more than 10 years of experience in appliance energy efficiency standards and labelling, with a specific interest and expertise in compliance policy design and implementation. Nicole leads CLASP's Europe team, and she's going to talk to us today about the key findings from their latest research. Over to you, Nicole. Thank you.
Thanks so much for that introduction, Natasha. It's great to be here to share the findings of our study and to have everyone on the line with us today. So I'm just going to jump into it. I think there's a lot to say and little time. So I think it's well established that gas cooking is a key source of indoor air pollution, specifically nitrogen dioxide. NO2 is a pollutant of concern, as it can cause and exacerbate respiratory issues such as asthma, especially in vulnerable populations like children. In fact, the WHO estimates that children in homes with gas cooking appliances have a 20% increased risk of suffering a lower respiratory illness. So despite this existing research, much of the public isn't aware of this invisible pollution in our home. So this year, we set out to really understand the severity of pollution caused by gas cooking, with a goal to raise awareness and identify strategies to tackle this issue. So CLASP partnered with a Dutch research institute, TNO, and a British-based market research and insight agency, Opinium, to conduct a Europe-wide study to measure air pollution from gas cooking in people's homes. We sent air quality measurement equipment to around 250 gas and electric cooking homes in 7 countries, including the UK, to determine just how much pollution is emitted into the home whenever people turn on their hob or oven. Sensors were set up in people's kitchens, their living room and a bedroom to understand whether this pollution spreads through the home. And a sensor was also placed outdoors to understand whether outdoor air pollution could impact levels indoors. And we monitored air quality in each home for around 13 days. The countries that we tested in were selected based on the high percentage of gas cooking homes and the number of children that could experience asthma symptoms linked to gas cooking, as you can see here in this map. So here's what we found. The next slide, please. So across all countries, gas cooking households experience significantly higher levels of NO2 while cooking. On average, pollution was almost twice as high around the home compared to those households cooking with electric appliances. Here on this slide, you can see a comparison of the average NO2 concentrations in electric and gas cooking homes in all countries. On the left, in the electric cooking homes, you can see that the highest levels of NO2 pollution were found outdoors. Those are the blue lines on the graph. And the highest levels were found in Romania, averaging around 28.5 micrograms per cubic meter. On the right, these are the gas cooking homes. The highest levels of NO2 pollution were found indoors, which you can see with the red lines. The highest pollution levels were found in Italy, Spain and Romania at just under 33 micrograms per cubic meter. Given this is a UK-focused webinar, I thought we could take a closer look at the UK on the next slide. So here we can see a clear comparison of the NO2 pollution levels throughout the home in the UK. This graph here represents data collected from 35 households in the UK, of which 28 had gas hobs and 7 had electric hobs and ovens. We had a lower number of electric cooking homes just because it's already well established that electric appliances themselves do not emit NO2. So you can see here the results for both our active and passive sensors. The active sensors that were placed in the kitchen recorded minute-by-minute data, whereas the passive sensors, which were placed around the home, as well as in the kitchen and outdoors, recorded the average pollution concentration levels over the whole 13-day measurement period. In every single room across the home, those that had a gas hob or oven also had nearly twice the amount of NO2 concentrations. We also found many more homes with gas ovens in the UK than in other countries, and pollution levels increased significantly when the gas oven was turned on. The levels sometimes spiked so high that they went beyond the maximum reading of the sensor. So on the next slide, we can kind of put this a bit into perspective. We hear a lot about the health risks of outdoor air pollution, and we expect to go into our homes and find some respite. But as soon as you turn on your hob or your oven, your indoor air pollution levels can get much worse than they are outdoors. The opposite is true in electric cooking homes, where the greatest risk is the air pollution coming from the street that can infiltrate indoors. But nothing is done to address this indoor air pollution. And the situation is pretty severe, as you can see on this next slide. Unfortunately, there are no mandatory indoor air pollution standards or benchmarks. So we compared our findings to the mandatory outdoor air quality standards in both the UK and the EU. And we also used the WHO air quality guidelines that define, say, acceptable levels of air pollution for both indoors and outdoors. When we extrapolated to a year, the results showed that around a quarter of European homes that cook with gas breach the EU and the UK hourly NO2 limits for outside air quality. People can expect to see more immediate health impacts once those hourly limits are breached. Specifically, asthmatic individuals can experience an onset of symptoms such as coughing, wheezing, or headaches. whereas no homes using electric hobs or ovens experienced those breaches. Over 57% of European gas cooking homes exceeded the WHO's daily guidelines of 25 micrograms per cubic meter. And added together, the WHO daily limit was breached for around 3.25 days over the 13-day testing period on average. You'll see from the European findings that there were a few electric cooking households that also exceeded the WHO's daily guidelines. This was found in the Netherlands and Spain. There were no electric cooking households in the UK that exceeded those limits. The households that were found to exceed these limits in the Netherlands and Spain, although they cooked on electric, we found that they had very high outdoor pollution readings, which must have been infiltrated indoors. So we also looked at the impact that cooker hoods had on air quality. We analysed data for 3 different types of homes. We looked at those homes that have a ducted hood, where air is extracted to the outdoors. We also looked at homes with recirculating hoods. These are hoods that can clean odours from the air, but essentially move it back into the room. They're often found in flats. And we also looked at the data from homes without any cooker hoods. And the results were quite surprising. So on the next slide, you can see that we found homes with cooker hoods, both those that were externally ducted and recirculating, had little impact on improving air quality in comparison to those homes with no cooker hoods. So in this graph, you can see the 3 different ventilation types and just how little the NO2 concentrations differ between each room. I think what's notable is that homes with recirculating hoods, which are not efficient, show even higher levels of NO2 than those homes without cooker hoods. We also found the same for particulate matter, PM2.5 levels, which are emitted through the cooking process rather than the appliance. I will say the recirculation hood findings weren't that shocking, as prior research has shown these products are relatively inefficient. But cooker hoods that extract air to the outside have been known to help reduce pollution from cooking and should have had more of an impact. So what this tells us is that these hoods are either not capturing pollutants effectively or they're not being used as intended. If you click again on this slide, you can see that on this next graph, that assumption is backed up by some findings that we have from a consumer survey that we ran earlier this year, where only a very small proportion of respondents said that they actually turn on their cooker hoods to reduce indoor air pollution. We found that mostly people tend to turn on their cooker hoods to help reduce smoke, get rid of cooking smells, and they often, I do this as well, they often turn off their hoods if they're too loud, and especially if you just don't really see the smoke. So what this tells us is that while proper ventilation is important, it's not a solution to gas cooking pollution in and of itself. And so I think all of this household monitoring data is incredibly important research. In the same consumer survey that we conducted earlier this year, we actually found that around 61% of respondents would consider getting rid of their gas cooking appliance if they knew there were health implications. But only, and this is kind of high actually, only around 41% of respondents actually identified a link between gas cooking and health issues. So getting this air pollution data, these findings, out in the public realm is critical. In the same survey, we found that people are used to and seem to prefer cooking on gas due to certain misconceptions they have about the technology regarding its efficiency and ease of control. And unsurprisingly, cost concerns, as well as being in rented accommodation, are all barriers that prevent people from making a switch to electric cooking. So I think that's all from me, with a very quick look through our findings. But on the next slide, you can look for more information. Some of the reports that we have on our website on this topic, and we have more coming out as well in the new year. So, thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Nicole, for such a clear explanation. The diagrams really help, just with kind of explaining the research and your findings. Really interesting. I'm now going to introduce the other members of our panel and open up the discussion. So Agnes Akipong is the founder and CEO of Global Black Maternal Health, an organisation that is committed to placing research and agency back into the hands of Black communities as leaders and change agents in their own health narratives. Earlier this year, Agnes launched the first annual Black Child Clean Air Conference, and also launched the Black Child Clean Air Report, which really focuses on the experiences and voices of Black mothers and children. Thank you for joining us today. And Larissa Lockwood is Director of Clean Air at Global Action Plan, where she leads our clean air work, including the UK's largest air pollution campaign, Clean Air Day. Larissa is an air pollution and behaviour change expert with building on 20 years experience in the sustainability sector. And thank you to you too, Larissa, for joining us. We'd now like to kind of get under the skin of this a little bit more and look at why this, the first kind of area we're going to explore is why this research, which, and I can see comments in the chat, it is interesting, but it adds to an increasing body of research and increasing awareness as well on the harms of gas cooking. And we wanted to kind of look at why this is important. A reminder that we definitely want to hear from you, the audience. So please do post your questions to the panel in the chat. Larissa, I'm going to come to you first, actually, to ask a little bit about issues around indoor air quality and whether they've, why they're important, whether they really have the kind of exposure that they deserve.
Thank you, Natasha, and thank you, Nicole, for bringing this issue to the clean air movement. It's something that at Global Action Plan we haven't really thought in any great depth about gas cooking. We've sort of known it's a problem, but not the severity of the issue. So I think we need to be talking about indoor air pollution a hell of a lot more, and it's fantastic to have the research that CLASP has been doing. So thank you for that. And we need to be talking about it more because that's essentially where we spend our time, indoors. 90% of our time we spend indoors. So the air we're breathing indoors matters an awful lot, and a lot of energy and effort is spent looking at sources of outdoor air pollution, and that's correct and proper, and obviously what's outdoors also comes indoors, but we do need to pay attention to what we're doing inside our homes. So I think as Nicole has said, that the health impacts are significant, and people just don't know about it. I mean, we do quarterly polling in our Clean Air Public Insights tracker and have been doing it since 2018. And the difference in levels of public understanding and concern about indoor versus outdoor air pollution are quite stark. Like, people are just not thinking about indoor air pollution at all. And when we ask questions about, can you list, which do you think are the biggest contributors to indoor air pollution? Of course, people put smoking, and that's right. But only 16% of people actually put gas cookers as being a major contributor. So it's really something, and I think your research highlighted this as well, Nicole, that people just aren't really thinking about. And so, yes, we need to start this conversation, and as a movement be talking about it a lot more because of the health impacts, but also because I think of the links to climate change, because there is discussion about the decarbonisation of home heating. So why not look at home cooking at the same time? And I do think that this is a neglected area of policy, and actually talking to policymakers in the UK, they do admit that, they haven't given it that much attention. So while we're looking at that transition to clean heating, I think we also need to look at that transition to clean cooking as well. So climate and health, and we need to talk about it more.
Thanks, Larissa. And it's great that we are making a start at least today. Agnes, if I can ask you this point about kind of people not knowing and raising awareness amongst the public. can you talk to me a little bit about your work with global Black maternal health and how, and your work on gas cooking, and I guess raising awareness within, like, taking a specific kind of segment of society, I suppose, looking at kind of
So I always say, I'm kind of an unlikely clean air advocate, because it just wasn't something that was on my radar, if I'm really honest. So I kind of fell into this work really via maternal health work. So I'm a maternal health advocate. And actually, the more that we were delving and seeing that pregnant women were presenting with underlying health conditions that they just didn't know that they had, preterm birth, looking at the Black maternal health crisis, where in the UK, Black women are nearly 4 times more likely to die, twice as likely to experience stillbirth, and a host of other reproductive health issues. It became apparent that whilst within the maternal health sector, we're looking at what's kind of happening in pregnancy, we weren't looking at what was making certain populations have disproportionate health outcomes, and that's where the environmental work came in. So Black Child Clean Air was really about actually asking, it seems kind of a basic thing that you would do, but if we're looking at the environmental sector and we're understanding it's the least diverse next to farming, why are we not going out to communities and asking them and getting their kind of baseline knowledge and understanding of air pollution? And then we can then, as we're implementing different policies and so forth, we can measure to see whether we've improved or kind of regressed. So we created the first Black Child Clean Air report, which was about really understanding the kind of the knowledge and the awareness around Black pregnant women. So either you were pregnant or had a child that was 5 years and under, and understanding what were your attitudes and behavior. And when it came to outdoor air pollution, a lot of people identified, I think something like 76% approximately identified that transport was kind of a major contributor towards, air pollution within their area. This was despite them not really having as much awareness around how air pollution impacted their health, but they could identify transport. When we looked indoor, and it was kind of similar to Larissa, what you were saying, smoking was kind of identified, and that was around 56%. Damp and mold was something that was kind of heavily identified, and that was around 56%. But when we went on to cooking appliances and how that kind of impacted you, that was around 14%, so similar to the 16% that you were talking about. And that's so important because, as you rightly said, people are spending 90% of their time indoors. But when you're pregnant or you're a child, sometimes it can even be a little bit more than that. You're at home most of the time. So if you're at home and you're exposed to different components that are contributing to having adverse health impacts, especially around such a vulnerable time when we're looking at pregnancy, and having kind of young babies in the home, then for me that's not just an issue about indoor or outdoor air pollution. It's actually a social justice issue. Is actually, a major health issue. It kind of starts now touching on other different areas. It's not just in an environmental sector now. It becomes a wider societal conversation, but are we having these conversations? Are we making people aware that this is not just sitting on the kind of prism of environment, but actually it's how we look at our health, and I feel like we're not doing that enough.
Yeah, and I think that's just so unsurprisingly, Agnes, perhaps, but we definitely agree. And I think that point about sort of not seeing these issues in isolation, but also kind of broadening the communities that we're talking to, I think are really, really key in terms of tackling the problem. I do want to come back to the issue of social justice, because I think it's a really key one when it comes to talking about gas cooking. And, Nicole, some of the results in the research showing kind of what the barriers are, I think, really points to that. But first, actually, I just wanted to touch upon this point about the environmental impacts of gas cooking. And really thinking about the sort of, Larissa's point about kind of, we're talking about clean heating, decarbonising the home.
Yeah.
And that connection between actually a little bit about what first of all CLASP are doing on gas cooking and how you're kind of connecting that to the kind of broader sort of net zero conversation. I'll come to Nicole first, and Agnes, I know you want to come in, so I will. I'll bring you in.
Thanks, Natasha. I think as you quite rightly say, it's not just health. There are climate issues as well. And we've been pretty busy on this over the past year or so. So I'd say, like, from our consumer surveys and anecdotal data, you know, I mentioned that there are some misconceptions around the performance of gas and electric hobs. For example, you often hear that cooking with gas is quicker, it's easier to control. But we've actually done some digging to understand how these products really perform. We've been testing these products to get some real data. Right now, there is no way to directly compare the efficiency of gas and electric hobs, and it's because these products are tested differently, just like before they can be sold on the market, even though they perform the same function. So something we've been working on is developing a new method to test and compare gas and electric hobs, so people can get a direct comparison of product performance and efficiency. We can use that data as well to get a better overview of the climate impacts of, say, transitioning from gas to electric as well. I can say our preliminary test results do confirm that induction is the most efficient, quickest, and easiest technology to control, you know, your temperatures and how you cook, and that other electric hob types also perform better than gas, and we'll be publishing more on that in early 2024. And I think this is really important information to have as we enter into these decarbonization net zero conversations, because it's clear that, you know, we have to be taking action. A lot of the focus is on heat pumps and you know, upgrading to heat pumps from gas and oil boilers, but we also need to make a switch to cleaner and more efficient electric and specifically induction cooking, fueled by renewables, to achieve our climate goals. Can you imagine, like, if we all had solar panels and an induction hob, your costs would go down, you know, we'd be a lot greener, a lot cleaner, and a lot healthier in our kitchens and homes. I can say as well that there have been other solutions pushed, or more sustainable solutions pushed, such as making hydrogen-ready appliances to address some of these climate concerns. But upgrading our infrastructure to accommodate hydrogen into our homes would be incredibly costly. And we also conducted some testing last year that showed the health risks, the pollution levels from burning the hydrogen-fueled flame in your kitchen are still, emitting higher levels of pollution. And we already have a clean and efficient solution ready to go, electric and specifically induction cooking. So let's hone in on that. Let's use that to improve our health, improve the climate. Yeah.
Thanks, Nicole. Yeah, and as you say, that kind of there's a logic to this that emerges. It's about kind of how we move on that path. Agnes, I know you wanted to come in on this point, so please.
Yeah, I definitely think that it is a wider conversation. If we're trying to go to net zero, we need to look at how we're doing that in all areas, not just in industry or in transport, in all areas. I suppose where my concern comes is what is going to be the cost, right? If we're now looking at it from a social justice lens, is it going to be people who actually can probably pollute the most, but can then afford to purchase these new innovative solutions, and then the kind of people that are on the ground who are bearing the brunt of the climate emergency and also the exposure to gas cooking not being able to. So they're my questions. I think this is the right conversation to be having, but how do we do this in an equitable way? That would always be my kind of focus. And I also think it's really important to talk about also the cultural aspects of gas cooking. There's been lots of projects done in African countries. I was speaking to somebody just even yesterday about how, I believe it was a Malawi or somewhere within that region, and I know definitely in Ghana, where they're like, okay, let's bring you these other new kind of sustainable cookers to cook your food, and they've either sold the women have either sold them or just got rid of them because the food doesn't taste the same, and it feels very much as them coming in, not respecting our customs and our cultures and the way that we do things, and imposing a new way of doing something. In cooking in a lot of societies is it's not just the food that you're eating, it's a cultural celebration. It's the way that we're doing things. So what I would like to see is, yes, we do need to raise awareness of the harms and the challenges, but it needs to be done in a culturally sensitive way. And then solutions that are coming up do need to factor that in. I was talking, again, another conversation, and, electric cookers that actually have a flame, because that bit of fire, we've been rubbing wood together from the beginning of time, right? And that part of fire, again, it often feels like it's for many cultures, it's a cultural way of cooking. It's not just, again, the food. But they're like grand, they're thousands and thousands of pounds, So even if you wanted to have that kind of flame aspect from an electrical standpoint, it's not affordable. So how do we ensure that, okay, we're having these conversations, we're moving into kind of, net zero clean solutions in the home as well as outside the home, but actually from an equitable standpoint, everybody can be a part of that conversation. Everybody can buy into that solution, so that everyone benefits from the health outcomes in an equal way.
Yeah, I think that's right, Agnes. And it just really struck by what you're saying about the kind of cultural aspects of kind of cooking. And I mentioned that Global Action Plan is doing lots of work on domestic burning, and I'm involved at the moment. And there's this kind of thing around this sort of mythology almost around wood burners, but kitchens are the heart of the home. That's how they're sort of sold to us. That's often how they are. Yeah. So there's something really, really challenging, and even I know anecdotally from colleagues who've kind of come to this research new and have been working on it, actually kind of being presented with this stuff is really challenging, because it's really challenging some really core perceptions about, like Larissa said, the kind of safety in the home. Larissa, actually, I wanted to come to you on the social justice point. And I think this point around, I suppose, who's, the polluter pays principle, and sort of, what that means in this context, and thinking about kind of people's ability to kind of make the shift that's needed.
Yeah, and as Agnes has said, it is a social justice issue, because it's those who are most affected who can do the least about it, especially children. Some of these shocking statistics, I think in one of your earlier reports looking at this, Nicole, that showed that children who live in a home with a gas cooker have a 42% increased risk of current asthma. I mean, that's huge. It's like 500,000 children sort of at risk of asthma from gas cookers. That's not insignificant, and kids can do very little about it. And when you start looking at the solutions, it's a lot of people can't do very much about this because they're in social housing or private rented accommodation, and it's not a straightforward switch that a renter can do. It is a bit more significant. You've got to have someone to come in and cut off the gas and install the cooker, the electric cooker instead. So, and even on the ventilation side as well, I think a lot of these flats are built, the kitchens don't have windows and have these recirculation hoods, which, as we've seen in the research, actually make the air pollution worse, because they sort of just move it around and blow it back into your face, rather than ducting out. So I think there's a lot that the sort of social housing and private rented sector need to do. I think all new buildings need to be built with sort of looking at electric and cleaner cooking solutions, and then working to retrofit where possible, working with the communities to make sure that it's appropriate, culturally appropriate, but looking at what those cleaner cooking solutions can be, and the ventilation solutions as well. I think the two have to go hand in hand, because even when you have one of these hoods, or with the filters in, those filters are not easy to clean, and they suggest that you replace them every 6 months. I mean, they're not cheap either. So again, it's like, who's actually going to be paying for this? Where does the burden of responsibility lie? And I don't think we can just put that on sort of the end user. I think this is like sort of the transition to cleaner heating. I think this is something where we will need government intervention and sort of paving out what that pathway looks like, with incentives, with support to help, especially those in rented accommodation, to make the transition.
Thanks, Larissa. And yeah, I think we want to come on to talk about solutions next, kind of in a bit more detail. Before we do, I want to take a couple of questions from the audience. The first one is for Nicole. Did you find that there was a change in perceptions about indoor pollution from gas cooking and the merits of switching to electric amongst the participants surveyed once they saw the monitoring results?
So that's a good question. It's something that we're actually going to be following up on in an upcoming next round of consumer surveys. We're going to be digging into some of these questions in a bit more detail, especially now people will have hopefully seen this research. But in terms of the households that we monitored, I just want to clarify, when we sent them the monitoring equipment, we didn't tell them what exactly we were looking to measure. We just told them we were looking at emissions from cooking, so that they wouldn't change their behaviors. I just want to clarify that. But after the monitoring was completed, once we had all the results, we have shared the results with households. Some of our national partners have actually gone and done some interviews with some of those partners to gauge some of those reactions. I can share one anecdote from one of the participants who mentioned she never thought that there were all these emissions in her kitchen. She knew that gases were circulating, even that they could be harmful to health, but she imagined they were tolerable enough that she didn't feel threatened. And it's important to start taking action. She said, I want to follow a healthy and sustainable lifestyle, and I have to start from what was revealed through research. So I think, by bringing monitoring equipment into homes, whether it's, in a field study like this, or just bringing, there are commercially available air quality sensors. I have one in my kitchen right now. We all can think a bit more carefully about our cooking habits, but you can also start to see the difference in how air pollution changes when you have your hob on, when it's off. I think hopefully this data will make a difference.
And Nicole, can I just add, because I thought a really other interesting aspect of your research was not just the levels of air pollution in the kitchen, but how it spreads throughout the home. And that I found quite shocking, like the levels in the bedrooms as well. And because we might, think to open the window in the kitchen, but we wouldn't think sort of before bed, having cooked a meal for our kids, to sort of open the window. You're trying to make it sort of cozy and snug. And I'm now thinking, God, have they been lying there in sort of this fog of NO2 emissions for the last 10 years? So I thought that was really interesting, because we have done research before. Actually, we were measuring PM 2.5, but I think the same point holds in that indoors, it takes a very long time for air pollution to disperse, because it's sort of trapped. And we've likened it before to a sort of toxic box, because there are also so many other sources of indoor air pollution, and who knows what sort of chemical reactions are going on sort of between them. But it did take hours and hours for the air pollution indoors to disperse from the peak, whether that was from a fire or from cooking. And that I found quite shocking as well. And your evidence showing levels in the other rooms was really quite profound.
And we actually had a question from the audience about plans to carry out research around gas cooking in PM 2.5 more specifically, because obviously a lot of this research focuses on NO2. I don't know if you had any thoughts on that.
What I should say as well is we did look at levels of PM 2.5, and they were pretty consistent across both gas and electric cooking households, because they stem from the cooking activity itself. But I think the key takeaway there was that either, you know, these cooker hoods, the ventilation types that are being used are either not efficient enough at getting rid of that pollution from the kitchen, or people are just not using them. So we did look at that. We also looked at carbon monoxide, but there were some challenges with the sensors and sensitivities to ethanol, you know, which can be found in cleaning products and stuff. So that wasn't a big emphasis in the results, and it's something that could be looked at further.
Thanks.
I did just want to echo what Larissa was saying. I actually had a team of researchers in my home who are doing another round of research across the UK and some in the EU. I saw there was a question about the content of natural gas. They're looking at that as well, and they ran some tests measuring air pollution in my kitchen and then in my kids' playroom, and essentially, like, after about an hour, say if I were cooking a stew, the pollution levels in the kids' playroom down the hall was as if I were standing right in front of the stove. So, yeah.
Wow. I think we should move on to talk about solutions. And so, to kind of segue neatly, I'm going to ask Tom from this is Tom Parks, who's the Air Quality Programme Manager at Camden Council. And I know he has a question for the panel. So, Tom, welcome, and please go ahead with your question.
When I could do it.
Tom, are you there?
I am here, yeah. Can you hear me now?
Hello. Yes, we can.
Sorry about that.
No worries.
Thank you, Natasha. Yeah, I was just going to say, firstly, I found Nicole's presentation really, really interesting and really, really useful. So I'm representing Camden Council, and we have an air quality programme which is looking to try to tackle outdoor air pollution, but increasingly we have a focus on indoor pollution inside homes and other places, and commercial restaurants as well, and specifically trying to address some of the health inequalities that exposure to air pollution causes and exacerbates. So the question I had was about discussing solutions, really. So what does the panel think might be some of the opportunities for councils as social landlords, but also planning authorities to, and I suppose by extension other types of landlords as well, and housing providers, what can we do to try to use some of the findings from this research to better protect occupants from exposure to indoor air pollution from gas cooking?
Thank you very much, Tom. Who'd like to go first? I'll ask you to kind of pass.
I don't mind going first. I think sometimes we can overcomplicate things in the sense that communities themselves have the answers if we involve them in it. And I think what I would say is, as a first point of call, is actually stakeholder engagement, because I could sit here right now and say, okay, this might work in South London, or it might work in Newcastle. It might not work in Camden, or different, within the different populations that you have. So actually understanding how your populations there use gas cooking, and then working with them to come up with some solutions on the ground. So I think there'll be a good stakeholder mapping opportunity in the first instance to start having those conversations, so that it doesn't become a kind of a one size fits all, which may fit some people and may not fit the other. And then you kind of start this whole problem of, for want of a better sentence, wasting public money, because you just, oh, this idea might work, let's shove that in for everybody that's living in that locality. And then you start having the same problems a year or two down the line. So I'd say go out there and speak to the community.
Right, I'll come in. I mean, Tom, I think a lot more work needs to be done working out the solutions and what the sort of policy pathway is, because I think there are those who can make the choice now, because there are a lot of sort of electric options on the market, and I'll leave it to Nicole to talk about sort of the consumer sort of angle of it, but that's only going to sort of help and address those that can afford to do it and have the sort of agency to do it, typically sort of home owners with some money who are able to switch. But then there's a lot of people who can't, who are in the social housing and the private rented sector, and I think that's where we need to look at what that policy pathway looks like for that transition. I do think it probably does involve, I mean, obviously involving the communities, as Agnes says correctly, but looking at sort of retrofit programs and rolling that out. I think some of Nicole's work has shown a very the sort of the cost benefit analysis of that, and in terms of sort of benefits to health and economy and so on, it will be positive. So it is definitely worth investing in. So I think retrofitting social housing will be important, and then making sure whatever new social housing goes in has clean cooking solutions as well as clean heating. And it would seem daft, you know, if we're sort of moving towards cleaner heating options and electric heating options, to have sort of a single gas pipe running into each home just to power a gas cooker. It's like, I do think the two have to be looked at together. And yeah, there will need to be incentives, there will need to be involvement from end users. We really need to map out what that pathway looks like. And as I say, it is a largely neglected area of policy that we sort of need all hands on deck right now. You included, Tom, because you're quite an expert in this area, to help map out what that would look like.
And can I just quickly add, sorry, because you just reminded me of another point there, Larissa, is that, you know, right now, if somebody is moving into social housing, they usually get 1 week's notice that you found a property for you, you need to move in, you've got a week. It comes with no flooring, no fridge freezer, no cooker, no anything. It's a plain home, a plain property. So oftentimes you get families coming in with their young children literally sleeping on the floors. So there is an opportunity there to actually already provide an electric cooker that's already inside, and to, you know, because you're a local authority, or there are local authorities, to actually have that en masse, because then it means it brings the costs down. People go in and buy that cooker because they haven't got a choice of the matter, and they're literally having a week's notice to move in. So thinking about, okay, what do we provide our residents, and then what is the cost benefit in the long term? Maybe an electric cooker is £150 or 200. I don't know what the exact costs are at the moment, but it could be that the material cost of actually providing that cooker in the first instance for people who are already on already in social housing means that actually in the long term it's saving X, Y, and Z amount of money. So looking at that as a kind of a cost saving benefit.
Nicole, did you want to come in on Tom's question?
Yeah, sure. So I think I agree with everything that Larissa and Agnes have said, 100%. I do think local authorities can, you know, set specific procurement requirements for social housing, for new construction, to require cleaner electric cooking and effective ventilation. I also think this is something that should be addressed by the manufacturers. We have an opportunity to address the air pollution directly from the source. You know, there are, of course, other sources of air pollution in the home, but we know what a key culprit is, and we can do something about it. There's the gas appliances regulation, which sets out safety requirements, specifically that combustion products should not contain unacceptable concentrations of substances harmful to health. There's no definition for what unacceptable is. And manufacturers don't even have to report or communicate to their buyers where the pollution is emitted by their gas hobs or ovens. And we do actually have an up-and-coming opportunity to address pollution from gas cookers. The eco-design regulations for domestic cooking appliances set out performance requirements that products have to adhere to before they're placed on the market. These apply to ovens, hobs, and cooker hoods. The government is currently reviewing existing requirements, and has an opportunity to build on the findings from our research and take some important steps to protect public health by requiring sustainable product design. So CLASP believes that these regulations are well positioned to ensure that manufacturers can test, report on, and potentially limit polluting emissions. And these regulations are also well placed to limit, to set pollutant capture efficiency requirements for cooker hoods to ensure that ventilation can be more effective. There's also the accompanying A to G energy label, which can help buyers, such as local authorities, compare between products. There is currently no energy label for hobs because of these differences in the way products are tested that I mentioned earlier. So we believe a new label should be developed so that consumers can not only compare the efficiency levels of gas and electric technologies, but so they're also warned if a product comes with an air quality and pollution risk. I think it's been made quite clear that people need support to make the switch to electric cooking. Government should be providing incentives to upgrade to induction where possible, and this could easily be coupled with existing subsidies for heat pumps. If you're going to decarbonize heating, why not decarbonize cooking at the same time? As mentioned, it's really important that this is made a priority for new construction and especially social housing. And I just want to make a plug that CLASP is working together with GAP to inform these upcoming policy discussions. And so we're looking for others to join those consultations and call for government to take action to protect our public health and the environment.
Thank you, Nicole, for the plug. But I did that was actually be my next question, was I suppose we've spoken a little bit about the role of local authorities. We've spoken a little bit about what manufacturers could do. I know lots of people on the call will consider themselves part of the clean air movement, so the sort of sector that's kind of campaigning for, to reduce air pollution in lots of different areas. And I suppose what are the next steps for the clean air movement? What can we be doing as organisations with audiences, but I guess also in collaboration and as a coalition as well? Larissa, I might come to you first on that, if that's okay.
Well, we need to talk about this a lot more. I know we've had this series of webinars with CLASP, which is good, but it's still not something that regularly comes up in sort of brainstorm sessions within the movement. People still aren't thinking about the indoor context as much as outdoor, and definitely not cooking as much as heating. So we need to keep talking about it. We need to come together to work out what this policy pathway is, and I think we need to present that to government and put pressure on governments to make that happen. And hopefully that's the sort of program of work we can continue to do together, Nicole. That's the plan. And we'll need the movement to get involved in that and communities to get involved in that, so that we're asking for things that are appropriate. And in the interim, I think there is a role for us to not just be talking about this sort of amongst ourselves, but also communicating this to the public, so that those who can make the switch now do make that switch now. Because it would be really good to have that energy labelling and information at the point of sale, because it isn't there. I've recently sort of bought a new hob. It's taken a very long time for this finally happened, but there was no information whatsoever about which is better for your health or better for the environment. Very little exists. So I think the more we can sort of put out in terms of comms assets to our various networks, local authorities on the call can put out information to residents. For example, we can put stories into the media like we've been doing sort of through this programme. We just need to sort of talk about this more and create that sort of also the sort of public demand for change as well, so that the policy pathway can sort of land and be implemented more successfully. Other thoughts?
Thank you. Thank you. I am conscious of time, so not that I want to silence the panel, but I would like to end on a question that possibly what I hope will be a note of kind of positivity and optimism. Are the panel optimistic that, because we've spoken a lot about how decarbonising the home and the role of gas cooking in that. So are you guys optimistic that decarbonising indoor cooking will be picked up as part of the net zero agenda? Because that does seem to be one pathway that kind of, is apparent before us. Agnes, I'll come to you first.
Sorry, I'm optimistic that yes, it will be picked up, but when I suppose is a real big question mark. Naturally we will have to go down that kind of route. But when, and then how many lives are going to be impacted? How many people that maybe don't have the information, the knowledge, the agency to be able to make a difference? How many of those people and those families are going to be harmed in the process of us getting there? So I think my kind of key issue there is, will it be picked up quick enough?
Yeah, I'd second that. I'm not feeling particularly optimistic with the current government about net zero in general. But everyone we've spoken to about this topic, about gas cookers and their role in reducing health inequalities and tackling climate change, has gone, oh, that's interesting. Didn't know about that. We need to do something about that. I do think it is a sort of genuine oversight at the sort of policy level that this isn't being talked about, and there does seem willing to do something about it. The Environmental Audit Committee, for example, did a recent investigation into indoor air quality targets, and they were really fascinated, like members of that were genuinely fascinated to sort of learn about the indoor air quality aspects and the cooking aspects, and have been asking for a lot of information and follow-up since. So I do feel optimistic that there are people in the right places who are genuinely interested in this, but it's just, how long is it going to take and how many lives is it going to cost along the way?
Yeah. Again, I echo both Agnes and Larissa's points there. I am optimistic. There's news from past strategies that indicate gas cooking is on the radar. It's maybe not on top of the radar right now, but I think that we can get there, and there is going to be a lot more research coming out. There's going to be some new organizations working in this space, really trying to elevate this at the political level as well. And I think next year will be a very interesting turning point. And just encourage everybody to keep an eye out and to stay engaged so that we can see some change.
A really important call, Nicole, and thank you for that. I think it's a great note to end on. I'm really sorry, everyone, we're out of time. Thank you so much to the audience for being really engaged and for all of your questions. I know we didn't get around to everyone's, and I'm sorry, but we tried to fit in as much as we can. We will be sending everyone a follow-up email with the recording and presentations, and also some useful resources. So keep an eye out for that. And it's great to kind of have you, we know you're interested in this topic, so we will, our aim is to kind of keep you involved as this work evolves and as kind of global action plan is part of the kind of, the movement taking action on this. To keep up to date with all of our clean air work, I would just give a plug for our newsletter. Do sign up so you can keep in the loop. But thank you to our fantastic panel. It's been really, really great. Nicole, Larissa, Agnes, thank you so much for your thoughts and insight and sharing your experience. Thank you to the audience for coming and for your engagement. And we look forward to continuing this really, really important conversation. Thank you, everyone.